Handling errors locally in components makes sense a lot because you probably want to do different things with errors depending on in which component you're at. Maybe here you want to show something went wrong, and in another component you want to show something different. But sometimes in some places you maybe want to execute some code globally. So no matter which HTTP request you send from within which component, you want to do something when that request gets sent and or when the response returns. You can do this with Axios with the help of so-called interceptors. These are functions you can define globally which will be executed for every request leaving your app and every response returning into it. This is especially useful, for example, for setting some common headers, like an authorization header maybe, or for responses if you want to log responses or want to handle errors globally. I will show you how to add interceptors in this lecture. Let's go to the index.js file because this is the most global file we have in our React app. It's the file where we actually start our React app by mounting it to the DOM. So here I now also want to import Axios from the Axios package, and all these Axios imports actually all share the same configuration. So that is why we can now also use Axios here and access a special interceptors object. And again, this will be then shared not only in this file, but across all files in your project. So it will affect all requests sent from anywhere in your app. There we can access the request object and now simply add use to register a new interceptor. That interceptor takes a function as an input which receives the config or the request, you could say. Now let's simply log that request to the console for now so that we can see what's inside of it. I'm calling it request, but it mainly is just the request config. That's important to keep in mind. Now let's save this. And if we go back to the app, we immediately see something in the log. This is the request which was sent, the request configuration at least. You see the headers which are added, and yeah, this is our request. This is what got sent here when we got the posts. Now, something went wrong here though, because we actually are blocking the request right now. In your interceptor function here, you need to always return the request or the request config. Otherwise, you're blocking the request. Now, of course, you can also edit the request config before you return it. That's the idea behind the interceptor. You can add headers, do stuff like that. So now if we save this, we get the posts, and if I click on one, you see another log because another request was sent, and for that the interceptor also ran, even though it was fired from a different component. As I said, all components, all areas of your app are covered with that. Now for that interceptor here, we can also pass a second function besides that request configuration changing function. We can add a function which handles any errors. So here we can log an error like this. We should also return promise reject error here though, so that we still forward it to our request as we wrote it in a component, where we then can handle it again with the catch method. This makes sense if you have some local task you want to do, like show something on the UI, but also globally you want to log it in a log file which you send to a server or something like that. So let's see how this works if I now save that file and now turn my posts, my get posts URL invalid again. Now you see something went wrong here, but you don't actually see the console log from the error handler from the interceptor. The reason for this is that this error here is related to sending the request. For example, if you had no internet connectivity or something like that, it should pop up. So if the request sending fails. We can also add an interceptor to handle responses though. We do it in the same way as we do it for the request, but we use the response object on the interceptors object. Then we also use two functions here. One function, and I'm copying it from above. One function which will receive the success response. We can also log it here, and we should return it so that we can also still use it in the component in the then block. So that is one way we should return it. And we also fetch errors, and we should also reject them here so that we can still handle them in the catch block locally in a component. Now with that added, with that response interceptor added and the error function being present, now if we go back, we actually see the log here and we still handle it locally. So both works. If I now go to the block container and turn my URL into a valid URL again, we see just the log for the response. So this is coming from the interceptor, as you can tell by the file name and line number. And this is another way of course, of potentially manipulating that response here, or logging it, or doing whatever you want. So being able to define these interceptors can be quite powerful. Again, a very common use case is for the request interceptor to add some common headers, for example, an authorization header. Though we also have a different way of accessing global Axios configuration. I'll show you how this works in the next lecture.